I'm recording live with Connor Derting, who is a creative guy. He's put out some creative works recently, put out a new album, and transitioning with his podcasting career. And he's written at least one book. Have you published your book, by the way?
No, the first book kind of didn't pan out the way that I anticipated, but I'm working on a second one kind of here and there. I'll come back to it someday. I'm kind of fully focused on music, but also I want to take one moment too to talk about the archive. Yeah, we're gonna make an official post about it. But BJ and I mutually decided to pull the plug on the podcast, at least temporarily. But with no plans in the future to start doing it again.
On indefinite hold.
Yeah, exactly. BJ's got a lot going on in his life. I'm getting ready to go back to school and make some big changes and all that stuff. But I do want to kind of just hint at a potential solo podcast that I'm going to set up. No details on it. We might be talking about things like what I think we're going to be talking about today. Generally.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I mentioned all that because between all those creative endeavors, the podcast, like you just mentioned, books you're working on, and then a lot of things that we talk about here, and of course the album that you just dropped. Is that your first official album that you dropped?
Yeah, so I released a couple projects, I would call them. Some people might call them a mixtape on SoundCloud a long time ago, but I kind of kept my I kind of just recently decided to combine the music with the people who follow me, because we can have philosophical discussions about ideas and sometimes politics and whatnot. And actually, that was inspired by I don't know if you know who Coleman Hughes is, aka Cold Man. He actually just released a couple songs. One of them is called Blasphemy. It's really good, really smart. And that was his first time blending like his intellectual sphere into his music sphere. And I kind of never did that, only because I kind of always just, I don't know, was afraid that people, and it's true, people do think this, there's a stigma around hip hop that it's unintelligent or that it's trashy. But then, I kind of had this epiphany thinking about, the great famous Carl Jung quote, which is people don't have ideas have people.
Right.
And I didn't wake up one day and be like, I want to be a rapper. It just sort of happened that way. And so I'm at a point now where I'm no longer going to waste time caring if somebody is denigrating me because I am a rapper or someone who likes to rap. And especially being a white rapper, I think that's kind of true. People, there's a lot of memes out there about oh, imagine being the guy in your hometown who's still trying to be a rapper. And it's kind of funny. I think people think of it sort of like, like the old captain of the football team from in high school, and he can't stop reminiscing on.
Can't stop wearing the Letterman jacket.
Yeah, the glory days on the field, right? But it's not like that for me. I just love making music, and I'm gonna keep doing it. And whoever doesn't support it, that's totally fine. That's their own prerogative. But I'm not gonna keep the two worlds separate anymore.
I would say that it's important to combine them. I mean, there's probably a bunch of artists that aren't coming to mind right now, but I don't know, what one that comes to mind is Bob Marley.
Sure.
His music was very political and philosophical. Some more than others. And there's a few others where I think that's a good sort of like muse and a good way to work that out, because if a person is just trying to be pure frilly art like Katy Perry or something, there's a place for that. But I think there's maybe a better place for mixing in the philosophical and political and humanities type things, because those things are hard to talk about. So if you can mix it into art, whether that's music like you're doing or literature, then all the better. So I think there's definitely a place for that. But is that what you found?
Yeah, no, I do agree. And I, am guilty of both. I
Mm,
mean, if you listen to my new album, Here at Last,
mm,
it's on all streaming platforms. There's some political stuff, there's some philosophical stuff, there's some esoteric stuff. But hip hop is a sport, really. I mean,
right.
it's the reason why a lot of rappers are, always having conflicts, and they're talking smack on each other, and letting out little lines, subtle lines in their songs that are taking jabs.
Mhm.
Hip hop is it's a sport, and you in order to do it right, you have to be competent in multiple criterions. Like, you have to have good metaphors, good flows, good inflections, changing your voice, all sorts, a multivariate thing. And it's really difficult to do that and still maintain like a philosophical undertone or a political undertone without coming off as corny.
Right.
It's really hard.
So when we decided to do this a few days ago, this particular recording, it was because we were kind of talking about your new album and things, and then I was like, I wanted to talk to at least one or two creative people about the creative process.
Sure, sure.
So that's kind of how we were planning to dive into this. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about your creative process in terms of you've got something you want to create and then it goes through the process of you and becomes something?
Yeah,
What's
sure.
that look like for you?
I go back and forth between two different ways. I would say
Mm,
at two different modes of operation. Um, Sometimes cause I listen to like 100 beats a day, on YouTube. And then if I like them, I buy them, or I
mm,
lease them or whatever. So eventually, it's kind of like, going to like an outlet mall. You got to weed through a lot of bullshit to get to
mm,
anything good. But eventually you find one that hits. And so what happens is either I just kind of start where my mind wants to go, and then it's kind of like a stream of consciousness.
right.
And it might seem like not everything is connected, but because it's not always connected. Sometimes it's just, like I said, the sport of hip hop, doing the metaphors and the similes and the alliterations and stuff like that. Other times the beat will tell me
Mm,
what it is that I'm supposed to talk about on it. And that's cool. I like it when that happens too, because it means that what I'm feeling I assume that if I'm feeling something like that from a beat, somebody else will get the same vibe, because we all kind of have like similar, we hear a certain symphony. We can all agree that that's a song that pumps you up, that makes you want to go exercise, or we hear like a sad song. Most people can obviously recognize that it's a sad song. So you can kind of go from there. The only other thing is that occasionally I'll have an idea like outside of any instrumental, and
mm,
then I'll go scouting for an instrumental that I think fits that idea.
mm. So it's interesting some of the things that you mentioned there, because um, one question I'm trying to figure out how to formulate here, and it's almost like a recurring question uh, that comes to mind in this area, is like um, not just the music, but maybe more so the creativity.
Mhm.
If there's a what the sensation is like bodily,
Mhm.
because I think when you go from a sort of like longing to create something, and then you go through that middle process, then actually have created it, you feel it in your body, almost like you've
Yeah.
birthed something.
Mhm.
Not to take away from what women actually do, but it kind of has that feeling. But what's that feeling like for you, bodily?
Sometimes I'll be writing a song that's
Mm,
so intense that it gives
mm,
me like actual anxiety, and I have to kind of like, there's a song on my
mm,
album called it's called Pray For Me. It's track number
mm,
3. And it's a pretty intense hip hop song. If you're, I think my sound is pretty eclectic. I have softer songs, I have harder
mm,
songs, I have some stuff in the middle. I'm all over the board. But Pray For Me is a pretty intense song. And I
mm,
remember when I was writing it, I had just gotten some bad news about a family member, so I had that on my mind. But I had gotten into this flow, but then every time I would keep progressing on it, my heart would start to race really fast, and I'd feel like the literal evocation of actual anxiety causing physiological
mm,
uh, things to go off. So I had to like turn away from it every like 10 seconds, but I didn't want to lose the momentum of what I was coming back to. So I didn't decide to like walk away for a day or whatever. It was, I was just doing as much as I could tolerate at that moment. So yeah, I agree. It is a bodily thing, I think, for a lot of people. And you know, even like performing, like I've heard stories about, you know, people who are 70 years old who've been performing, you know, famous musicians who've been performing their whole life, and they still throw up every time before they go on stage. Like this is all, it's actual bodily, you know, things going off, whatever, no matter what you're doing or what facet of the art you're participating in.
Because one underrated book that I haven't finished, but it's actually Jung's Zarathustra seminars. And I put up a quote on the Facebook group as I was kind of preparing for this conversation.
Sure.
And I'll just read like one or two lines from it because it made me think of this part of our conversation that we're getting to, which says, nothing is more poisonous than the nothing is more poisonous to the nervous system than a disregarded or checked creative impulse. It even destroys people's organic health. It is dangerous because there is that extraordinary destructive quality in the creative thing. And I mentioned that again because I know we've talked a little bit in the past in some of our podcasts, at least briefly, and you don't have to go into it much, but you know how you deal with some anxiety issues. So yeah, I just think that your creative process is something that kind of brings healing to you, and if you don't do it, then sort of like that quote, it can be poisonous. Is that something you would think too?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's why for a long time I focused more on writing and podcasting, even though it's not my primary passion. Like I am passionate about it the same way that I'm passionate about cooking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's not it's not the thing that I can sit in my office and lose track of the time and, you know, realize, oh my God, I really have to, you know, take a piss because I've been sitting here for 4 hours and I've just been so into it that I forgot. I mean, that's only music can do that for me. But the reason why I thought podcasting and writing is because I thought that would be more monetarily valuable to me. But then I realized exactly what you said in that quote is so true. I'm potentially compromising my mental and physical health by not doing the thing that makes me the most happy.
Yeah, which kind of leads me again to another interesting question, because you mentioned the way you described what you just described sounds a lot like something I wanted to ask you about, which is how what we might call peak experiences and or flow states fit into the creative process, which again, it sounds like what you're sort of describing a minute ago. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about being in flow states and or peak experiences during your creative processes?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so it's always they call it flow in hip hop for a reason, and it's not just in hip hop. I think breakdancers use that term too. It's all about flow. So part of you might be able to make a good song by writing one line a day. I have my doubts though. I think that you need to get into a place where you're opening the floodgates a little bit, and then eventually it dissipates and it dials down and it becomes a light stream, and then eventually you get to the end and there's no more water. That's usually how it goes. I do always find that the hardest part of I don't know if you ever read The War of Art.
Oh yeah, I was actually going to mention that book because it's basically what we're getting at in this conversation.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book, but one of the things that it says is that the closer you get to the finish line, the harder it is to get over that hurdle. Right, and I do find that the last like section of every song is the hardest part. Like that's where you have to dig the deepest, because when you listen to a beat, you're going to have a lot of things coming at you if you're musically inclined or whatever. But the more you progress on that, the harder it is to find that thing, which is why flow states are so important, I think.
Right. And it's interesting that you mentioned that too, because anything that I do creative, whether it's a podcast or even just like writing a paper for school or anything, Yeah, I definitely find that's the hardest parts, because well, the hardest parts are either starting it or finishing
Yep.
it.
Yep. Yep.
Because of course starting it, there's just the procrastination, but then once you get going, that's where the flow and sometimes even peak experiences come in, and then you're flowing. But then the hardest part is then to say, I'm done with it, I'm submitting it, I'm uploading it,
Yes.
whatever else. So how do you find what helps you get over those two hurdles, starting and finishing?
Oh man. Well, I mean, I'll talk about the second one first.
Okay.
Starting is easy. I don't have a problem starting. I have a
Okay.
problem. Certain things I have like writing on a book is harder for me to start and sit down. Music, I don't really have that problem. But my problem is that I always, I'm a perfectionist a little bit when it comes to it. So even,
Mhm.
I love my album that I put out. I think it's the best body of work that I've ever put out. But I still, as I'm listening to it here and there, there's a few parts where I'm like, ugh, maybe I
Mhm.
could have fixed that. But
Right.
you get to a point where it's like, okay, you just got to step away, because I've I've spent countless hours on it. I've worked out all the major blemishes, and then even the minor blemishes. There's some things that you just got to let go. And there's sometimes where I work on a song so much where I don't even like it anymore by the time I put it out, because I've just hurt. I mean, I'm also mixing and
Mhm.
mastering my own music, so
Right.
that makes it difficult.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because yeah, especially if you can be perfectionist, because I mean that even just me putting out podcasts, that's the difficult part, is to just be like, for me with podcasts too, the difficult part is on the starting side is the preparation.
Mm,
Which it depends, like this one, we're mostly talking about your creative process, so probably a little bit less preparation. But sometimes when it's like, I really want to talk about this book or this subject, like some of the podcasts we've even done together,
right.
it's all the preparation. And then it's like, because you almost have to finish the preparation. And it's like, when do you say you're prepared enough? But I don't, have you seen that even? Because yeah, that was like the part two of the question, is like, do you see that even, maybe it's more so with your other creative endeavors, to get in the preparation, or maybe even with it sounds like you put off doing this album for a little bit just because of some of the things that you mentioned. um yeah, what's it like for you to get over that hurdle of uh starting a project you really want to do?
It feels really good on where I'm at now. I definitely, for a few weeks after I released the album, or well, not a few weeks after I released it, but you always want to upload it a month ahead of time before instead of future release date. It just helps the algorithms and whatnot.
Right.
But for like the first 3 weeks after I uploaded it, I was like kind of feeling that, that little dopamine drop. Where do I
Mm.
go from here? What direction do I want to take it? But I've since gotten over that. But to answer your question, at this point now, I mean, my goal ultimately was to just put out one body of work that I'm really proud of,
Mm.
so that way I can start releasing singles, which is the way to go
Mm.
these days. Albums really aren't like, unless you're really well known, albums really aren't the thing anymore. It's all about
Yeah,
singles.
because we don't put out CDs anymore,
Right,
or
exactly.
LPs.
And people have shorter attention spans, so they're more
Right,
likely to listen to one song rather than a full project all the way through.
right,
Uh,
right.
so that's where I'm at now. I'm ready to just start making singles, and finally being at that point is actually like, way putting an album together. I think is a lot more stressful than putting together one song. They both are stressful, but
So, all right, a deeper question, or maybe just like an overarching question, less so about you, but more the creative process in general,
yeah, for sure.
that I was thinking of as soon as we were talking about doing this, is um, there's a certain aspect of intelligence, and
Mm,
there's a lot of research trying to get this more precise, but it's hard because there's an overlap of what you might call verbal and pattern recognition and problem solving type of
sure.
intelligence, like what you typically do on an IQ test. Uh, and the interesting thing about that, and in terms of IQ test, is that much, well, really, you can only even test it. I mean, it's testing for IQs above about 120 is really tough, but to get intelligence above approximately 120, maybe 130-ish, it requires a lot of what we traditionally think of intelligence, pattern recognition and problem solving, more the verbal type. But to get above that requires more of the creative type of intelligence. Like, so on those type of IQ tests, if a person takes one of those, instead of saying like, recognize this pattern, it's saying like, how many uses can you think of for a brick?
Yeah.
Because so a creative person will be able to come up with like dozens and dozens and go on forever about what you can do with a brick.
Right.
Whereas a person who's uncreative will just say, well, you can put it with a bunch of other bricks and build a wall, or maybe come up with like 2 or 3. So yeah, I guess this is kind of getting.
I wasn't aware of that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So in terms of like intelligence, how have you found that or experienced that like creativity is maybe as big or bigger of a part of intelligence and achievement and accomplishing what you want to accomplish? Like, I don't know, like how do you compare the two, like traditional type of intelligence with creative intelligence?
Well, I kind of share the same sentiment as Eric Weinstein, which is the idea that I don't think intelligence is equate to greatness. I think some of the greatest people, or what like most people would agree is great. Someone who can do an amazing spin when they're ice skating, or do a crazy. I think the world record for like most flips by a skier was just broken, or a snowboarder, or whatever. That's something that's just great. It doesn't really require intelligence. It requires competence and greatness. What you're saying is really interesting. I've never heard this idea, but it makes sense that people over a certain threshold of IQ require a certain dimension of creativity. Right. And that just makes sense because you see these people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and whatnot. They're really technically smart, and they also are innovative and came up with a new idea that actualized their intelligence, like that they were able to implement their intelligence. So I think implementation is a huge part too. But yeah, I mean, it's funny though, because some of the most creative people I know are not the most intelligent. They're just highly creative, but that's maybe obfuscating the word a little bit. Like that's or distorting the word rather. It's because intelligence could mean so many things. Part of music is pattern recognition. Right. So I wonder how much of that element is shared with people who are really good at it in computer coding, let's say.
So yeah, I mean that kind of lends to another question, or an idea at least, is that there's some artists, and I don't want to denigrate anyone like Kanye West, for example. Sure. But Kanye West, and there's probably a bunch of other examples we could think of, but he's maybe one of the best examples. Where
he is a musical genius.
He's a musical genius, and he is a genius in other ways, including various forms of art, and definitely branding, definitely whatever he does with shoes. I mean, they're kind of cool, but I don't see him as like $600 worth of cool, but that's just me.
There's this new phenomenon though of rich people wanting to dress as though they're not as rich. So I think he kind of saw, like, pattern recognition kind of noticed that trend starting to come about and capitalized on it,
Right. So
social intelligence, maybe not so much with Kanye West, right?
Yeah. But I guess what I'm getting at is that, like, there may be some people, and again, these are more like broader questions, but there may be some people who are ultra creative and just enough in terms of like traditional type of intelligence, pattern recognition, etc. Whereas there's other people, maybe along the lines of Steve Jobs and some of the people that you mentioned, the big entrepreneurs like Bill Gates, where they're highly skilled in the pattern type of intelligence, but then they have enough of the creative power to take that to the next level.
Right.
So I don't know, is that what you found in your experience, or as you look at the landscape of people, is or what do you think in that regard, that like the two seem to work hand in hand, the intuitive creative part with the sort of, and another way of thinking of this, which is sort of like Nietzschean or even Ian McGilchrist, is like the Dionysian sort of right hemisphere way of looking at the world, which is looking at the world as a whole, a holistic view. And then there's the Apollonian left brain way of looking at the world, which is more scientific, rational.
Right.
And it seems that we're all a balance of those, some more on the creative side and some more on the
Sure.
logical side. And you need to find way to balance those together. Probably artists are more on the intuitive creative side.
Right.
But what has been your experience or your observation with this?
For myself?
For yourself, or just what you think in general of these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for the most part, people, there's not a lot of people who are dead in the center, in my opinion. I think most people lean one way. I think it kind of has to be that way. Otherwise, you're kind of like stuck between two worlds a little bit, I think, and that causes some pathology. Like me personally, like I don't know if anyone is watching me who knows me like from the daily discussion days. I thought I was way smarter back then, logically, than I do now. I definitely think I lean more creative on the creative side of things. And it's like it like shoots. I think for people who are creative, and this is true from my own experience, is it just shoots out of them everywhere they go. You go to their house and they have rooms in there that are just beautiful, covered in art, or there's some schema that they've put together, some paint, some color coding, whatnot. You might see it in the meals that they make. They're really creative with cooking. I think it's one of those things that dominates every aspect of their life on both sides too. So if you're on the logical side, you almost feel like you can't let someone get away with saying something that's semantically incorrect. It like kills you inside, probably. I don't have that problem. I can let things slide like that. But yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, people lean one way, at least slightly.
Yeah, you mentioned the extremes. So it seems like on the extreme creative, it's almost like a version of what's the word? Not hysteria. The other one.
Like a savant?
Maybe in some cases. I was thinking, so, and what happens too is if you get too creative, you see pattern connections everywhere. Because you still have the pattern connection side, but you're like ultra intuitive, and that's how a lot of times people fall down rabbit holes that they shouldn't go too far down, because it gets into sort of like a fantasy world that they want to project as real, like the QAnon movement and things like that, which of course any good conspiracy has an element of truth, including ones like that. But basically, if you're too far on one side, the creative side, you overly see patterns everywhere to the point of delusion. And then on the other extreme, if you're too much noticing proper perfect patterns, then it's hard to get anything done, because it's like all you can do is disregard things that aren't perfect patterns, or basically whatever's not rational, throw it out, and then you're not left with much. So I don't know what has been, because you mentioned people are largely one or the other, and then also you mentioned like pathology. It seems like, yeah, maybe there's a pathology of being too in the
Oh
middle.
yeah.
But then there's also pathology of being either extreme. But what do you think, or what's been your experience?
Well, I really feel bad for artists in the modern world. Well, I feel it's a double-edged sword, actually. Or it's a, you know, it's a gift. It's bittersweet. It's a gift and a curse, because on one hand, the technology exists to put your stuff out there, you know,
Right.
whereas back in the day, you know, maybe you were lucky if like your town of like 100 people had been exposed to your music or your art or your writings or whatever.
Right.
Nowadays, you have access to putting out so much. You can put out stuff to potentially garner huge audiences, and and that does happen for a lot of people. Um, on the other hand, I don't think our economy really fosters or rewards creative people to the degree that I think it should. I think that might change over the next 80 years, as you know, as you know, like autonomous AI and robots and whatnot take over kind of arbitrary jobs. Will maybe the economy can be more focused on, predicated on a creative
Right.
type of theme. But that's neither here nor there. And the other problem with the fact that it's so easy to put your stuff out there is, I think that we're seeing this phenomenon of people who aren't even that intelligent, aren't even that creative, aren't even that competent or good at anything, become super famous
Right.
because it's just because there's a humorous element to it. And so that oversaturates the algorithms in the market to where the guy who's actually putting out good music or writing good books is kind of at the bottom of the barrel. No one really looks at him. Everybody would rather watch Bad Baby, you know, in her rap career off of Dr. Phil, you know?
Yeah, and then yeah, I read somewhere that the Catch Me Outside girl, she
Yeah.
just bought a house for like, I don't know, millions of dollars, and
Good for her, man. Live your best life. I'm not,
yeah. I mean,
that's,
good. Well, which is kind of like an interesting other part of the discussion that you just brought up, which is like, I think we're at a transition point in our, and maybe it's going to be a long transition point, you know, like not a short one, but one that might take anywhere from a few decades to a century, but to where the huge technology advantages are like appealing to the lowest common denominator. You know, people like
yeah.
Catch Me Outside girl and TikTok being like underage girls shaking their butts and
Yeah.
all this
Or
stuff
if,
that
or even like affiliate marketing people, like
yeah,
selling, you know, uh, training workshops on how to get
yeah,
skinny fast, stuff like that.
yeah. And I mean, there's a place for a lot of that, and this is just one thing that I'd like, I think everybody should start to be more mindful of, is in this sort of technological revolution that we're somewhere in the middle of. It makes it really easy to do a couple things. One, do creative things, and then two, uh, somehow publish and monetize those creative things, or at least get some kind of feedback or recognition for those creative things. Um, but you know, like I was saying a minute ago, yeah, at this point in the technological revolution, and you know, you could even look at it at like what happened with like the early days of the internet. In the early days of the internet, it's like all pop-ups and everything giving you viruses
Right.
and taking you to porn sites. And there's still some of that, but it's become much less compared to maybe the early days, or at least, you know, people can be more mindful of that, and you know, make those decisions to go to those risky sites or whatever if they want to. um, and I think we're probably kind of going through a similar thing in the
Mm.
creative world, where the creative world is a lot of garbage, but also a lot of good stuff. Then, of course, the difficult thing is to shift through the garbage to find the gold or the good stuff.
Right.
So there's like all these different sides to it. That, like, that's on the consumer side. How do you sort through the garbage? And then again, on the creative side, how do you use technology to better create? And then ultimately, so I guess we'll in the terms of the creative, we'll just look at that as sort of like a two-part question. Is like you mentioned earlier toward the start of this conversation how you're like listening to beats all the time. So how do you see technology helping you create, and like what are some maybe ways that you avoid the distractions or the pitfalls, or how to like not overly use certain things or anything like that, whether it's in your music or your anything else that you do creatively? How do you see
Yeah.
this part of technology and helping that, and also how do you like avoid some of the pitfalls of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to talk about me too much, but I will. What comes to
Yeah.
mind is, part of my origin story was, just sitting in. I mean, I've been writing rap since I was like 7 years old,
Mm,
maybe earlier. Seven is about when I can remember. And I remember just writing lyrics in class and thinking that that was good enough, and that I could just eventually find the beat for the lyrics. Um, but it never really dawned on me until like things like, I discovered things like LimeWire, where I could download like 50 cent instrumentals and, different various rapper instrumentals. And that kind of changed the game for me. That allowed me to like actually write to a beat. But then, of course, that progressed and became YouTube. And now there's this huge platform where producers can put out their beats. There's a website called BeatStar if anyone is interested in getting into hip hop. It's BeatStars is a website where people can put up their beat, and you can buy it at 3 different tiers. You can either lease it for $30 or somewhere around there, and that is a kind of a contract between you and the producer where you get to make all the revenue off of like 50,000 streams. But then once you go over that, you have to give them like a 20% cut, something like that. It's generally how the contracts work. Or you can buy the exclusive rights, which that could be anywhere from like, $500 to $3,000, something ridiculous like that. And so these technological innovations have made it more accessible for artists to outsource. I think that's the key part. I think there's, I think at one point in time, you had to be good at every aspect of it, or else you weren't going to make it, because you didn't, unless you were really good at networking and finding people to outsource organically, which you certainly could do. You don't need to do that anymore. You can outsource to people you've never met in your life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even like it was a process for me just starting like a year and a half ago with this podcast. I had basically I used Fiverr for the intro stuff, and it was kind of interesting there because like I wanted those like 2 or 3 lines recorded a certain way for that intro. And it's funny too because it was like sort of producing that little thing of 30 seconds or a minute or so. It's a lot like producing a single, I guess.
Sure.
But what was interesting is I had like 3 or 4 different girls read the one line. The one guy I knew I wanted I wanted him to do it, but then what I ended up doing is like having the 3 girls mixed together, the 3 ladies. So and people might not always notice that, but to me, what that did is, it's kind of funny because we're talking about like sorting through the garbage, and like a couple of those tracks were like literally like garbage. Like I threw them out because it's like not good enough, because I wanted to focus on 1 or 2 of them. But then being able to bring them together, at least in that little like 30-second or 45-second little intro music, brought together like the feel that I wanted of like a community.
Sure.
So it's more than just like me or one guy or like one thing. It's like a community. So
nice. I like that.
Yeah. So I don't have you seen anything like that in your process of like sorting through garbage and then finding gold where maybe you didn't expect to find it?
Yeah, I mean, I often will. I mean, I'll go back to like, so I'll tell you this. I've written, recorded, and mixed and mastered probably over 50 songs that I just completely scrapped. Like they'll never see the light of day. Occasionally though, I go back and I listen to it. I'm like, okay, this part was good. The problem wasn't with this part. The problem was with this part. So
Right.
maybe I could salvage the song by getting rid of this part, coming up with something new, and then keeping the chorus or this verse or whatever it is. And then other times I'll go back to writtens because I write all the time, and a lot of those lines I'd never use. But sometimes I come across something that's like, oh, I'm kind of more advanced. I know what to do with that.
Mm.
If that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay. So the other part of the technology issue is, I think, another one that most creative people find tough, and I think you mentioned it just a little bit, is the monetization part.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me though, it's twofold. One, it's feedback, and then the other is monetization.
Right.
Because if you're getting some feedback by people talking about it, downloads, or all those kind of things that aren't necessarily monetized, it's feedback showing like if you're going the right direction or not. But then ultimately, if a person's gonna be creative like professionally, then that literally means you've got to make money off of it.
Sure.
So because I know you've gone through that a little bit with your other creative endeavors, the podcast. You've been involved in like 2 or 3 of them, and which I think those are really important, by the way. Whatever happens with them, they're part of the like your personal creative journey.
Yeah, for sure.
But what's the process been like for you to find that feedback that you need to make sure that you're putting out something of value, and
Yeah,
keep finding that?
sure. And well, I have 2 answers. One, and I don't want to go on like an angry rant about the politics of
Oh yeah,
streaming
yeah.
services, because they
Make
absolutely
money.
they make a lot of money.
Yeah,
and
even
and they,
YouTube.
yeah, and the artists don't make that much. But on the bright side, on the topic of technology, there
Right.
are websites like TuneCore and DistroKid. I use DistroKid. Where you can upload your music with the cover art or whatever. It'll automatically distribute it to Spotify, iTunes, Google, whatever. And every time someone watches, you get a play. And then of course there's things like Patreon, um, and people can buy your albums and stuff like that. So that's a blessing as well, but it's also there's a dark side to it, because what should have happened is once artists started going towards being independent and less reliant on the labels, the artists should have made more money, but that's not necessarily what happened. The streaming services capitalized on that and said, no, we're gonna decide how things go, and because we're so big now, you kind of have to acquiesce or else you kind of fall under.
Yeah, it's tough.
And that being said, as far as like me, like making sure what I'm putting out is a value, I'm pretty lucky to have grown up in a town of called Sumner, Washington, where there happen to be like a lot of artists who I'm still friends with to this day. Some of them were my best friends back then, and they're still my best friends today. Shout out to my friend Therese. He's an amazing musician. I've shared some of his stuff on Facebook. I have a network of people basically, and I can send them the stuff before I, even a video of me rapping it or just like a rough draft of the song. I can send it to them, and they'll give me honest feedback on that. As far as getting feedback like in the public domain, I think people are pretty, I don't know. I think a lot of people just are just stoked about the fact that you're creating something and you're putting it out there, and maybe they're not necessarily musically inclined, so they don't feel like they're in a position to where they can say, oh, hey, I liked this part, but I didn't like this part. They're just supportive and that's fine too. It's support your friends and your local artists. Like everybody should be doing that.
Right.
But there's on the other side of that too. There's a lot of goblins out there, a lot of trolls out there who are, like I was, this advertisement came up for this rapper in Boise named Nathaniel, and he wasn't bad. Like he really wasn't. Like he was actually, I would say that he was pretty good from what I saw. And of course, you go in the comments, there's a lot of people supporting him, but then there's one guy who's just like, this was so cringy. We don't need any more Eminem or Jack Harlow wannabes, like, whatever. And the Nathaniel guy responded pretty gracefully, and I kind of got like, I don't know, I actually stood up for the guy. I was like, honestly, like people like you, like I don't know your personal life, man,
Right.
but I'm gonna guess that there's something that you want to do, want to aspire to do, and that you're not living up to it. You're not even trying, and that's why you feel this need to project subconsciously this resentment towards them. And people like that, man, those people need to really do like a thorough audit of themselves. If you don't
Right.
like the music, that's fine. You can even comment and say, this really wasn't for me. I'm not really
Right.
into it. That's fine. But to like just shit on somebody altogether, dude, you have some internal work to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, I I think that's a good observation, is that most of the trolls, they're actually probably dealing with, on some level, what we're talking about earlier, where they've got that sort of inner toxicity, that poison from not doing their own creative work. And so rather than healing it by doing their creative work, like some of the things we also talked about,
Right.
like putting things off because it's hard to start and finish, then they just troll other people.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think that's exactly it. That's a great point. If maybe if they channeled that into something creative, they wouldn't be such a hateful human being.
It would even take a little bit of creativity, or at least intelligence, to give them constructive feedback.
Right.
Like
Right.
sometimes that's what I'll try to do to people, sometimes privately, sometimes a little bit publicly, is just give some constructive feedback.
Right.
But that takes a certain amount of creativity and a certain amount of energy and effort, where those kind of trolls, they don't want to do any of that.
Right. Right. Well, and you know, it's even a good critic, like a self-proclaimed critic, doesn't
Yeah.
say that this, I just reviewed the album and it's trash. They're gonna say, they might list a bunch of reasons why it fell short in their opinion, which is fine, but they're not just going to come out and be like, it's terrible, because that's not what a critic does. You know, a critic is more thorough than that. And you know, I was just like, I do the same thing. Like, I'm not a big fan of like a lot of this new, I don't know, I'm not going to say I'm not a fan of it, because I actually am a fan of certain aspects of the new era of hip-hop. I like that we're incorporating more melodic structure, more melodies. I don't like that it's kind of the content always is not very high resolution, I think.
Right.
But I was watching interview with Lil Wayne, and like Lil Wayne, obviously like my favorite rapper, right? Like I think Lil Wayne is one of the greatest of all time. I think he is the greatest of all time.
Wow.
And he's been relevant in 5 eras of hip hop. He's been around since we were in diapers. And I was watching an interview of him the other day, and they were like, how do you stay relevant? Like, what is your secret? He's like, the secret is that no matter how the music industry changes, I try to find the good in each era, and then do that, like just the good parts of it, and not be one of those guys that's like, oh, these new guys, they're not, it's not even real hip hop, stuff like that.
Right. That does start to lead to another important aspect that I wanted to try to touch on at least a bit, which is it might almost sound unrelated, but I think you'll realize it really is, which is like, in cultivating creativity, maybe one of the most important but underappreciated parts of that is to cultivate the right people around you, the right social group.
Yes.
Because if you get the toxic people, like those trolls and those kind of people around you, that's going to be a bad effect. If you get the also, if you get too much of the like yes men around you, and that can have maybe the opposite but equally bad effect. But then on the other hand, it's hard to sort through and, you know, just get the right people around you that are gonna cheer for you when you're doing well and support you when you're maybe not doing so well. So how would you say that you've found, or even a phenomena, if you want to be less personal, to cultivate the right people around you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more successful you become, the harder it is to avoid the yes men. Because I think a lot of people are just trying to capitalize and ride the wave of your success. Whether that's just with, you know, going out to fancy dinners or partying or whatever, getting your bill covered when you have a big tab at the bar, at the club. whatever it may be. That's a struggle in and of itself. As far as you know, like trolls, if you happen to be an up and coming artist, it reminds me. I mean, I think to what Jordan Peterson says, and he's not necessarily talking about artists. He's saying, but what he says is that if there's people around you, and you're talking to them, and you're really trying to tell them something, you really want a message to come across, and they're not listening, stop talking to those people. Just run away from those people. And I think the same is true for people who are just always gonna, you show your buddy a song and he's like, nah, it's not very good. It's like, he might be telling the truth that one time, but if every single time that all they have to say is it's not very good, find somebody who, at the very least, find somebody who says, I don't really like it that much. Here's why. This is what I think you could do better. And I think but I do think that there's potential in this part, like really constructive stuff like that. Finding those people these days, in the days of the internet, hard to find, but they're out there.
That is tough. Yeah. I mean,
how do you experience that with like the podcast? I mean, do you have like a network of people that you know?
I try to, and so this is my this is, I think, my battle, is that one, the kind of stuff that we do is a little bit specialized. It's not like it's not for everybody. Like if, in other words, like if I go into a coffee shop in a bar or whatever and be like, hey, you want to like be a person that talks about Carl Jung and Jordan Peterson and these like deeper issues of things, and then likewise, even if you do start to find people like that, usually what that it is in general are people that are just like very anti something, like they're anti-woke. Like I think that's one challenge in like some of the content that we get into. It's like if they're kind of like in this camp, they're just like anti-woke. So that's part of the challenge, because then it makes it challenging to just be like, because when I first started kind of getting into some of these like books and ideas a few years ago, I thought I would just like this was like me being a little bit naive. I thought I would just like tell everybody. It was like the gospel almost. I was like,
yeah,
I'll just tell everybody about it, because I realize how great this is, whether it's Robert Greene or Jordan Peterson or Carl Jung or whoever else, and their ideas, not just them. That just kind of like is a shortcut to kind of like encompass some of those deeper thoughts. I'll just like tell people about that, and then they'll see how great it is, and then I'll have like friends that I can talk to about that. But whether it was like family or friends that I already had, they're just like boring.
Yeah, that happened to me.
Yeah.
That happened to me when I started to meditate and have these experiences and these visions, and I'm just like going off, raving and ranting, like, you have to see this, you have to see this. And everyone's just like, come on, man, like come back down to earth, your head's up in the clouds. And they were right to a certain degree. Like you can't expect everybody to, it's just like if somebody comes to me with some crazy equation that they came up with in their physics calculations, and they're raving and ranting at me towards it, but I might just either not have the interest or the capacity to understand. You can't expect everybody to have the interest or the capacity to understand. And maybe, and there's probably something that they have the capacity to understand about pertaining to some subject that you don't as well.
Right.
So I experienced something similar where I'm just like, look at this, and nobody wants to listen.
Yeah. So where I think that puts us, and you probably, especially living in a place like Idaho now, have experienced this too, especially during the pandemic, which is like another level of all this, is it's not hard to find people to connect on these levels, but the difficult thing is you end up finding them very spread out, which is part of this, at least geographically, which is part of this technology revolution, like we're talking about earlier. You can find a lot of books, and you can start to find how to, research and create better. It gets difficult when it comes to like production and monetization, but that is the difficult thing about the social groups. It's not just like, oh, you're just gonna like like it, I don't know, maybe it's easier, like I look at sometimes people like Snoop Dogg, for example, because he just kind of like grew up in Long Beach, and then he took his gang crew literally from Long Beach to becoming his like music gang crew, and some
Right.
of the other artists did similar things, where I can kind of see how that had its advantages, especially, and this is why I think people even from around the world and across the race spectrum identify with people who make it out of those situations, those tough sort of like ghetto situations or gang situations, is because that's like overcoming major adversity
Yes.
that we all sort of experience on different levels, but that's like a heightened version of it. And so when you take somebody out of one of those situations, whether it's gang situations, crime situations, projects even, it seems like it's an easier transition
Yeah.
compared to just being like, hey, here we are, just like suburban white people that want to start philosophizing or
Rapping.
or rapping even. Yeah. So I don't know, has that been your challenge too?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I have struggled with that in the past, just being somebody who, comes from a pretty well-off family.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you live in an environment where there's no opportunity, and then finally an opportunity comes, I think you're more likely to really seize it and not let it slip through your fingers. I have now had the blessing and the curse of being like actually poor, like for a few years, like below, like pretty close to the poverty line, probably. I'm doing fine. I mean, I'm fine, but I think that's given me a little bit more fire
Right.
to actually do something. And I think that was like an ineradicably necessary experience for me to have. I think people, yeah, there's occasionally like, you'll see an artist's son or daughter or a tech billionaire's son or daughter do something of value. I think for the most part, it's hard to do that when you just have the way paved for you. And that just makes sense, right? That's not like some deep philosophical insight. That seems self-evident, right?
Oh, um, yeah, like I have like a because yeah, there was something I was going to ask earlier, but now it's kind of in that context, because earlier I was thinking of this idea of how like we want to cheer for like individual artists that are really creating, and I see that of course in things like music, even podcasts, and even like quote unquote influences or whatever that are, compared to like billion-dollar companies or million-dollar companies that are just cranking things out. And I would also put it in the context of movies. The reason I was thinking of that is because of, like you're talking about, we don't want to just like shit on reviews, but sometimes I am with certain things like created by Disney, like Disney Star Wars, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
Where if that was created by like even someone like George Lucas, but maybe not even at George Lucas level, then it would be a different case. But it's like things like Disney Star Wars and even the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're not created by somebody. It's like created by focus groups and these billion-dollar pump things out. But I would say also in light of what you were saying just a minute ago, an individual who's really trying to create out of their own creativity, there's like a specialness that we can all connect with, compared to if they're just kind of created by a conglomeration. But
Yeah, I feel the same way about music, right? Like,
yeah,
like I feel like pop music has kind of degraded a little bit over
right.
time. I mean, and granted, pop is a funny thing because the amount of sounds that are possible in music,
Mm,
like is like infinite. I mean, there's so many sound combinations, but in pop specifically,
mm,
it's the most narrow slice of combinations. Like
right.
it's such a small. There's not a lot of like uh, variety. You know what I mean? It all kind of follows a similar structure.
Mm,
So I guess that's maybe intentional. Like maybe it serves a purpose in some way. But I feel personally like I can tell when I listen to a song and it's coming from someone's heart rather than just being by the books. You know what I mean? Like being technically good, but like you don't feel like that same like that individual or that group of individuals like really felt this, really internalized this, and then actualized it into this amazing song. You know,
right.
I think
S-
Kanye West said something about that in the new movie, which is really good.
Okay.
Um, but he was basically said like I can tell if someone's just like following a textbook or if it's like really a genuine thing that they're doing, and I think most people can tell that.
Right. Okay. So like maybe one of this like important questions I want to try to like or ideas I want to try to like zero in and we'll start to wrap up is the idea
Mm.
of um sort of what we've been on for a few minutes, but it's like on one hand, if a person is provided for, um, it has an advantage because they're not so constantly worried about uh, where their next meal is going to come from, or if they should go study something more lucrative, whether that's
Right.
engineering or nursing or whatever else. Nothing against them, but it's just not as much of a creative endeavor. Um, so it's like what's both have their advantages. One is the advantage of like, here's $1 million, create something or whatever it is. Maybe it's like $30,000 to like an advance on a book that sometimes people will get, and that might have a certain advantage. Or somebody who's like discovered on YouTube and then they get X amount of dollars to put out a bunch of music compared to um, sometimes I think it's called like the death ground battle strategy Robert Greene talks about, and I think it's in The Art of War, where it's like if you don't create something to save your life, you will die.
Whoa.
It pulls something out of you, and maybe not necessarily literally die in this context, but
Right.
your career will die, or
The
your
wither on the vine.
right. So, um, what do you think in terms of like how we find that balance or how we do it? Especially because I know you're going through some of the same things, talking about studying more and some of those things. So, what's the advantage of either or both, and how do we find the balance in
Yeah.
those?
I some guy in my apartment who lives in like my townhouse. I live in like a townhouse complex.
Mhm.
He is always like mobbing out of the parking lot, right?
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And he like got behind me the other day as we were like pulling into the parking lot and was like upset with me that I wasn't like going fast enough for him. And like came up to me and was like, hey, like, sometimes some of us have places to go, like you're like going 2 miles an hour. I'm like, there, well, first of all, there's kids around here. Second of all, like, have you heard of something called time management? Because it seems like you lack it, and you
Yeah.
could probably be happier if you implemented it. So I would say that's just me taking a moment to be petty and jab at number 406.
Yeah.
But no, seriously, time management is so
Mm,
important. Like I'm going back to school for something
mm,
that I'm also passionate about.
mm.
Um, honestly, if I had to, if you put a gun to my head and say, hey, you can only focus on the creative stuff that you're not sure will be as fruitful financially, or you can go do something that is going to be fruitful financially. I would choose the creative stuff and then work a mediocre job to get by. I mean,
Right.
that's just me personally. I think you should do what makes you the happiest, and
Mm,
maybe, but you also, but people also have responsibilities. So if you have a child and you're
right.
sitting in your house rapping all day and it's
Yeah.
not pay, it's not paying the bills, you
Right.
should probably do something about that. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't rap. That just means that you need to have some time management skills to make sure
Mm.
that you're allocating the proper amount of time to where it's not bleeding through other aspects of your life and taking
Mm.
away from your responsibility to other people.
Well, let me rephrase that one little way to see if we can dig in, and then we'll probably wrap up. Is like, just what do you think gets more uh creative power out of a person, whether it's you or in general? In other words, like, is it the times when you've got your back against the wall,
Mm,
and because of that, should a person maybe do more of that, but also be wise with it, like you mentioned a minute ago?
sure.
Or is it, and sometimes I think of this too, in particular of, the person who one person that we talk about a lot, Carl Jung. He married into money. you
Did
know
he?
well, yeah, his wife Emma,
Which
uh
one? Which one? Oh, Emma.
Rothbard. Well, yeah, he was only married once. He just had one or two mistresses.
Yeah, yeah.
But she her family owned, like, and actually still owns the, like, second or third largest watch and clock manufacturer in the world.
Mm,
uh, which there's still one of the wealthiest companies in the world, or at least in terms of watches and jewelry and clocks. So he married into, like, uh, a wealthy family, and growing up he wasn't very well, which is actually, and some people criticize him for that. But I think what's interesting about his story, and which is why I think, everybody should read at least Memories, Dreams, and Reflections,
yeah,
is he grew up pretty poor. He was like
sure.
a poor, I think, ministry family, but I'd have to double check, because there was, like, I think something happened to his dad, and then his mom remarried or something like that. But he was poor growing up, and then he married into money. So I don't know if maybe something along those lines might be ideal if a person had the opportunity, is to go through both a season maybe of uh, being shapen by poverty even, and then having needs taken care of, at least for a season, so a person can focus on their creative endeavors. But
Right. And
what do you
and
think?
and, and yeah, and uh economically,
Mm,
economics aren't the only way that somebody can suffer, right? Like you can,
right,
I mean, I've recently just kind of gotten past a bunch of health problems that I was having.
right, right, right.
You can lose somebody who you love, you could lose a child, you can, be uh,
Breakup, lose a job.
anything, right? Like
Right,
there's infinite numbers of ways to suffer, in my opinion.
right.
And yeah, I mean, that's important for, creating that relatability factor in your music, and you know being raw, vulnerable, and honest, and not just channeling it for you, but
Mm,
channeling it for others, so they can say, well, hey, at least I'm not the only one. And this song kind of helps me get through it, because it almost feels like a support system for me,
right,
because now I can have something to relate to. But then when you experience the joy and the blissful moments, and the moments where everything kind of comes together in this perfect, beautiful way, that you can channel that into a song, where and then someone who's happy can listen to it and
mm,
share that happiness with you, essentially, through your music. So both are important. I think you can kind of tell when
mhm,
you listen to like an artist's discography whether they have their life has been more stricken with suffering or happiness. I mean, and
right.
I don't think it's bad either way. I just um and personally, like, I have a hard time being creative when when I feel like I'm going through
Mm,
strife. um but I can always isolate it for later on when I'm feeling good. And I because I can feel good but still make a song about something that's not a feel good song,
mm,
um about my past or something. So I think there's a spectrum for sure, but I think both are really important for the process. Or maybe not. Like, maybe you're a happy person all the time, and people come to you for that. They come to you because they want to celebrate their happiness with your happy music.
mm,
And maybe there's people who have gone through a lot of bullshit, and so people come to you because you've gone through a lot of bullshit, and so have they. And that's their their medicine.
right. One thought on this, and then we'll wrap up for real.
Yeah.
Is like technology again comes to mind. So it's like you and I have both done things like drive for Uber and make deliveries, so that between all of that and also having the flexible schedule, we can do research and creative thinking. So one is like, how have you found creativity, or how have you found technology to help get through the financial element of it? And then I guess the wrap up question is like, how can people find your music and stuff?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, you did bring up Uber. It's kind of cool that are
Yeah.
like I think like 1099 jobs in the gig economy like that
Right.
are a great avenue for people who want to have time to create their stuff. Because
Right.
you can
and the flexibility.
right, exactly. I mean, unless there are other jobs that do that, but I think they're more on the higher scale.
Right.
Where you choose your own hours and whatnot. But just having that luxury is so good for creative people. That's why I've done it for a long time, and it's been really helpful. Don't be afraid to if you're an artist and you have you have paintings, don't be afraid to go ask some little coffee shop, some hipster little coffee shop, if you can
Right.
put them up and see if somebody wants to buy them. Don't be afraid to, if you make music, to go up to local little bars and say, hey, do you mind if I do a couple songs one night? I mean, just put yourself out there, do it. Who cares what anyone thinks? And honestly, I believe that if you press on something enough, eventually you're gonna get something worth having out of it. It might not be exactly what you expect.
You'll
It
at
might
least
not
get
be
the growth out of it.
exactly. And I really believe that, like, if you go down a rabbit hole far enough, there will be something there it might not be $1 million, but it'll be something that you'll be like, I'm so glad I got that.
Right.
Whether like you say, whether it's the growth, whether it's $100 that you've got paid for doing a show, or whatever. There's something there that's everybody, I think, if you just keep pushing. So that being said, my album Here at Last is on all streaming platforms. So Spotify, cool. Amazon, YouTube, iTunes.
Yeah, I'll link it.
Yeah, for sure. So what you want to type in is Kiroh. That's my name. It's Kiroh. And then Here at Last, it comes up right away. If you want to buy it, you can buy it on Apple, iTunes, and stuff. But if you want to stream it for free, Spotify is the place to be. So,
right.
I just see what I just did there.
Yeah, I like it. Any other where people can find you or get in touch with you or find your information or find any of your stuff or anything like that?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at General Kiroh or Twitter at General Kiroh. Facebook, you can just type in my name, Connor Derting. That'll be tagged in the post. And if you want to collaborate with me on music or talk anything philosophy with me, or anything ideas related, don't hesitate to reach out. I love it when people talk to me. So
sounds good. I'm excited to hear more creative stuff and more podcasts. So be in touch. And again, thanks a lot.
Always good to see you, Isaac. Seriously.
All right. Take care. See you around.